They say the guillotine was a mercy. Quick, clean, humane. But that's the lie that makes the French Revolution easier to digest. Because for King Louis XVI, the blade wasn't the horror. It was the months before the blade. For 160 days, they didn't just imprison him. They dismantled him. Not with torture racks or hot irons, but with something colder. Bureaucracy, humiliation, isolation, and the slow, deliberate stripping away of identity until the King of France became a piece of evidence with a heartbeat. Forget what you think you know about Louis XVI. Forget the powdered wig caricature. Forget the idea that he simply lost his head. Because what they did to him before the guillotine was far more horrifying than you think. This is the story of how a revolution turned a living king into a public warning. How they took the most sacred job in Europe and made it look small. And by the end, you'll understand why the real execution didn't happen at the scaffold. It happened in the days when he was still breathing. Welcome back to Wacky History, where the past is real, the people are unhinged, and the good old days are usually a lie. Now, to understand what happened to Louis, we have to understand one brutal truth about revolutions. Revolutions don't just overthrow governments. They overthrow meaning. They take words like king, law, sacred, loyalty, and they smash them into new shapes. And Louis XVI was the biggest word on the page. So they couldn't just remove him. They had to rewrite him. They had to take the living symbol of a 1,000-year monarchy and make the world watch that symbol get reduced step by step into citizen Capet. And the process was so methodical it feels modern, like an institution running a checklist. Take away the title, take away the ceremony, take away the family, take away privacy, take away time itself. And when you're done, the body can die in seconds, because the person already died in public. So let's set the scene. Paris, the early 1790s. A city vibrating with hunger, rumor, and rage. The revolution has already eaten the old order alive, and now it needs something else. It needs legitimacy. Because it's one thing to shout freedom, it's another thing to prove you're in control. And nothing proves control like putting a king on trial and making him answer to people who used to bow. But before the trial, there was the capture. The moment the monarchy stopped being an idea and started being a prisoner. August 1792. The Tuileries Palace, once the center of royal gravity, turns into a trap. Crowds surge, gunfire cracks, and the king's world becomes noise. People picture this like a movie, a dramatic escape, a heroic last stand. But Louis wasn't that kind of man. He was cautious, reserved, a ruler who hesitated in a century that punished hesitation. And the revolution didn't just punish him for politics. It punished him for being the wrong kind of king at the wrong moment in history. After the collapse, they move him to a medieval fortress in Paris, the Temple. And if that sounds poetic, like history choosing the perfect set, understand this. The Temple wasn't just a prison. It was a machine. A stone tower designed to do one thing really well: make time feel endless. Inside, the royal family is watched constantly. Guards at the door, guards in the hall. People whose job is not just to stop escape, but to observe, to record, to turn every moment of the king's private life into public property. And here's where the psychological cruelty starts to show its face. Because at first, They don't treat him like a condemned man. They treat him like a mistake that needs to be processed. They change the language. They stop calling him Your Majesty. They correct anyone who slips. They make the title feel embarrassing to say out loud. They call him Louis Capet, not because it's accurate in the way we think of names, but because it's useful. It's the revolution saying, you are not a sacred office. You're a citizen with paperwork. And the most horrifying part, it works. Not because Louis agrees, but because language is a cage you don't notice until the door locks. Now, people love to argue about Louis XVI like it's sports. Villain or victim, weak or misunderstood. But to understand why his final months were so horrifying, you have to zoom out. Because Louis didn't start as a monster. He didn't even start as a revolutionary's dream target. He started as a young man who inherited a system that was already rotting. France was broke. The tax system was a joke. The nobility guarded privilege like it was oxygen. The poor paid in hunger. And the king sat at the top of all of it, like the lid on a boiling pot. So when the Estates General is called in 1789, it's supposed to be a fix, a meeting, a negotiation. But revolutions don't come from meetings. They come from momentum. And once the momentum starts, it doesn't care who intended what. The Bastille falls. Paris becomes electric. Fear spreads through palaces and villages alike. And Louis is pulled into a role he was never trained for. The king of a collapsing world who has to pretend he's still in control. Then comes the moment that seals his fate in the public mind. The attempted flight. The royal family trying to slip out of France, to reach safety, to regroup. But they're recognized, stopped, dragged back. And in that moment, millions of people stop seeing Louis as a flawed ruler and start seeing him as a traitor to the new nation. Whether that's fair or not doesn't matter anymore, because revolutions don't run on fairness. They run on belief. And once the belief hardens, the king will betray us if he can. The rest is just procedure. So back to the temple. Louis XVI, once the axis of an empire, now living under rules set by men who used to fear his signature. Imagine what that does to a human brain. Not the abstract king, the human being. The man who grew up surrounded by protocol so thick it became reality. Now, every door is locked from the outside. Every conversation might be overheard. Every movement is counted. And the revolution isn't in a hurry to kill him, because time is part of the punishment. Here's a detail that tells you everything about what they were doing. They didn't just want him dead. They wanted him ordinary. So they start forcing normality onto him like a straitjacket. No court, no rituals, no public mass as a state event, no endless procession of nobles and petitioners, just meals, books, prayers, and the constant presence of guards who aren't impressed. And if you think, well, that's not horrifying, understand what kingship was. Kings weren't just leaders. They were concepts. They were treated like the kingdom had a human spine. So the revolution's strategy is simple and brutal. Break the concept first. Then the man becomes easy. Now comes the next phase. Separation. Because the most reliable way to weaken a prisoner isn't pain. It's loneliness. At the temple, Louis is with his family at first. And that matters because family creates a small universe that a prison can't fully control. You can lock the doors, but you can't lock the bond between a parent and a child. So the revolution starts tightening that bond, not in one dramatic moment, but in administrative inches. restrictions, rules, permissions that used to be rights. And Louis, whether you admire him or not, is forced to learn a humiliating new skill. Asking to see his children, asking for privacy, asking for paper, asking for time. And every time he asks, the revolution teaches him the lesson again. You are not the one who gives. You are the one who receives, if we allow it. Then the trial arrives. And if you think the trial was about truth, you're already falling for the theatre. Because the revolution didn't need to discover whether Louis was guilty. They needed to teach France what a king is allowed to be. They needed a ritual that replaced coronation, a public undoing. Imagine what it feels like to walk into a room where the verdict is a foregone conclusion, but the room demands you participate anyway. That's not justice. That's humiliation with paperwork. Louis is brought before the National Convention. Men in plain coats, some former lawyers, journalists, merchants, now acting as judges over the monarchy itself. And the accusations aren't just, you made mistakes. They're existential. You conspired against the nation. You spilled blood. You betrayed the people. It's not a trial of a policy. It's a trial of the idea that one man can be the state. Now here's what makes it horrifying. They debate his life like it's a motion. Not in secret, not behind closed doors, but as an event. An ideological spectacle. A performance where everyone in power gets to vote on whether the king deserves to keep breathing. And Louis has to sit there knowing the truth. This isn't a contest he can win. Because even if he defends himself perfectly, even if he's calm, even if the evidence is messy, the revolution needs his death the way a fire needs oxygen. So he becomes a tool, a lesson, a warning to every future leader who thinks they're untouchable. And the debate isn't just guilty or not. It's how and when. And should the people vote too? Imagine hearing your death discussed as a scheduling problem. Imagine realizing your life has been reduced to procedure. That is the kind of horror that doesn't leave bruises, but changes the way a person exists inside their own skin. And then the decision comes down. Guilty. And after more votes, death. And if you think the horror stops there, you're missing the point. Because now comes the worst part. The waiting. Once a man knows he's going to die, time becomes a predator. Every hour is heavy. Every sound in the hall feels like a decision. Every step on stone is a question. Is this the moment? This is where the revolution's psychological strategy becomes obvious. They don't rush him to the guillotine immediately. They let the sentence breathe. They let it echo in the temple tower. They let his family sit with the knowledge that the father is marked. And Louis does what humans do when the walls close in. He reaches for meaning, religion, routine, a last attempt to keep his mind from being occupied by the state. He writes, he reflects. He tries to prepare himself like a man who knows he can't control the outcome, but can still control the way he walks into it. And then the revolution does something that sounds small, but is monstrous when you understand it. They control the goodbye. They allow one final meeting with his family. Not because they're kind, because it's another lever, another way to remind him that even his final human moment is something they can grant or deny. Picture the room. Stone walls, dim light, the air thick with the knowledge that tomorrow will separate them permanently. His wife, his sister, his children. And if you think of kings as distant, like marble statues, this is the moment that ruins that comfort. Because in that room, Louis isn't France. He's a father trying to imprint himself into his children's memory before the world erases him. He gives advice. He urges forgiveness. He asks them not to seek revenge, because revenge is how revolutions keep eating. And then they have to leave him. And this is the part people don't talk about enough. Leaving is its own execution. Because the goodbye doesn't just break the heart, it breaks the future. After that door closes, everything becomes a countdown with no distractions left. Now we reach the final night. Louis knows the hour is near. The guards know. The officials know. Paris knows. And the revolution does what it does best. It turns a death into an event. They plan the route. They assign troops. They decide how the crowd will be controlled, how the sound will be shaped. Because sound matters. A king dying in silence feels like tragedy. A king dying under drums feels like victory. Now comes the morning. Early. Cold. The kind of morning where your breath looks like smoke and the city feels like a stage before the curtain rises. Louis XVI is woken, not by a servant, not by a gentle protocol, by guards and officials. Men whose job is to make sure the king's final hours belong to the Republic. They supervise everything, even the clothing, even the hands. And here's the detail that hits like a punch when you think about it. They bind him. The physical act is quick. Rope, knots, a body restrained. But symbolically, it's the revolution announcing, even now, you don't control your own limbs. And we want everyone to see it. Then they take him out, down the stairs, through corridors that used to exist to protect royalty, now used to process him like cargo. Outside, the city is waiting, and the route to the scaffold is packed with soldiers, not because they fear Louis will escape, but because they fear the crowd. Because once you teach people that kings can be killed, you've taught them something bigger too. That power is touchable. So they move him through Paris as a controlled image, a living poster, a slow parade of humiliation designed to broadcast one message. The old world is finished. And it's not just insults. It's not just jeers. It's the fact that every face he passes belongs to someone who used to be below him, and now has the power to watch. That's the revolution's real cruelty. It weaponizes the gaze. Because being hated is one thing, being observed as you fall by thousands turns you into a story that no longer belongs to you. When they reach the square, the guillotine is there, like a machine waiting for its next job. The scaffold rises above the crowd, and the moment becomes unreal in the way trauma often does. Because Louis is still alive, still walking, still a human being with lungs and heartbeat. But the crowd is already treating him like a past tense. Now, this is crucial. Louis tries to speak. Whether you agree with him or not, a man about to die trying to speak is one of the oldest human instincts on Earth. It's the instinct to be understood, to shape the final sentence of your life. But the revolution cannot allow that. Not because words are dangerous in some abstract way, but because if the king speaks with dignity, the story gets complicated. And revolutions hate complicated. So they use sound like a weapon. Drums, loud enough to drown him. Because the revolution isn't just killing Louis. It's killing the possibility that he dies as a king. They want no final speech that becomes legend. No last words that soften hearts. No moment where the crowd pauses and thinks, wait, he's human. So the drums keep beating, and Louis is guided into position. Seconds. A blade. a crowd that erupts like a storm, releasing pressure. And just like that, the guillotine does what it was built to do. But here's the line that matters in this story. If you only remember the blade, you missed the horror. Because the guillotine lasted seconds, the dismantling lasted months. And that dismantling was deliberate, calculated, repeatable. Now we have to talk about what happened after. Because the revolution didn't end with the king. It escalated. When you cross a line like killing a king, you don't step back into normal life. You step into a new world where power is proven through purity. And purity demands enemies. So the machinery keeps turning. Trials become faster. Suspicion becomes currency. And the guillotine becomes less like a punishment and more like a policy tool. And if you're thinking, okay, but Louis was a king, he had it coming. Here's the uncomfortable part. This story isn't terrifying because Louis was innocent or guilty. It's terrifying because of what it shows about systems. If a society can take the most protected person in the nation and reduce him to a name they chose, a schedule they controlled, and a voice they drowned out with drums, then the real power isn't the sword. It's the story. It's the authority to decide what someone is allowed to be. Louis XVI didn't just lose a political fight. He lost ownership of his identity. He went from king by divine right to citizen under accusation to condemned man under escort. And if that transformation feels like a cold machine, that's because it was. The revolution didn't invent cruelty, but it perfected a modern kind of cruelty. The kind that doesn't need sadists. It only needs procedure. So when people say, the guillotine was a mercy, remember what came before. The months of controlled humiliation. The slow deletion of personhood. The way they turned a living king into a public object. That's why this story is far more horrifying than you think. Because the blade was the ending, but the true execution was the process. And the scariest part, processes are reusable. If this story hit you the way it should, subscribe to Wacky History. We dig up the past the way it actually was, messy, brutal, and way more human than the myths. And drop a comment. After hearing what happened before the guillotine, do you see Louis XVI as a villain, a victim, or something far more complicated?